They mocked her tiny pet, until the honey badger flattened their leader. Part 1. The doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Sarah walked through them with steady steps, her boots clicking against the polished metal floor. Behind her, padding along on short legs, came a compact animal with silver-streaked black fur and small dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The chamber fell silent for a moment, then the laughter started. It began with the delegation, their deep rumbling chuckles echoing off the high ceiling. There were massive creatures, standing nearly 10 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished stone and muscles that rippled beneath their ceremonial armor. They were warriors, conquerors of 12 worlds, and they had never hidden their doubts about humanity's fitness for the Galactic Defense Pact. Their leader, Commander, rose from his seat, his eyes fixed on the small creature following Sarah, and his mouth split into what might have been a smile revealing rows of sharp teeth. "The human brings a pet," he said, his voice translated into standard galactic through the chamber's systems. "To a military council. How very human." More laughter rippled through the assembled delegates. They clicked their mandibles in amusement. Even the normally diplomatic exchanged glances that clearly said they found the situation odd at best, foolish at worst. Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had expected this. Her superiors back on Earth had warned her that bringing Badger might cause exactly this reaction, but she had insisted, and eventually they had agreed. Where Sarah went, Badger went. That was the deal she had made with him years ago, and she kept her promises. She took her seat at the human delegation table. Badger, whose official name was Atlas but whom everyone called Badger, settled at her feet. He looked completely calm, almost bored, as if the dozens of alien species staring at him meant nothing at all. Ambassador continued, moving closer to her table. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, meant to intimidate. "We have observed humanity for some time now. You are clever, we admit, innovative with your technology, but you have a fatal flaw." He gestured down at Badger. "You waste resources on creatures that serve no purpose. You form emotional attachments to animals that cannot defend themselves, that cannot contribute to your society's strength. This is why we question whether Earth belongs in the Defense Pact." Sarah looked up at the towering alien. She didn't stand, didn't rise to meet his challenge in the way he likely expected. Instead, she reached down and scratched behind Badger's ears. The animal leaned into her touch, making a soft sound that might have been contentment. "Commander," she said quietly, "you're making several assumptions. The first is that Badger can't defend himself. The second is that he serves no purpose. The third is that caring about other living things makes us weak." She paused, meeting eyes. "You're wrong on all 3 counts, but I suspect you'll figure that out soon enough." His crest rose, a sign of irritation among his species. Several other warriors shifted in their seats, hands moving toward weapons that diplomatic protocol forbade them from carrying. The tension in the room increased noticeably. "The human makes threats," said, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice now. "Or perhaps jokes. It is hard to tell with your species." "Neither," Sarah replied, "just an observation." A delegate, smaller than the but still tall by human standards, stood up. "Ambassador, perhaps you could explain why you brought your companion animal to this summit. They make a fair point, even if they express it poorly. We are here to discuss military matters, defensive strategy, humanity's role in protecting Council space. What purpose does your Badger serve in these discussions?" Sarah was about to answer when the lights in the chamber suddenly shifted from their normal white to a harsh red. An alarm began wailing, a sound that started low and built to an ear-splitting shriek. At the front of the chamber flickered to life, showing the space outside the station. 3 ships hung there, dark and predatory, their weapons ports glowing with building energy. They hadn't been there a moment ago. They must have dropped out of cloak right on top of the station. "Scourge Raiders," someone shouted. The name sent a ripple of fear through the chamber. The Scourge were pirates, slavers, and worse. They hit fast and hard, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction behind. The station shuddered as the first weapon strike hit the shields. Emergency protocols kicked in immediately. Armored shutters began to drop over the windows. Security doors started to close, attempting to seal off sections of the station. But the Scourge were faster than the station's automated systems. They had done this before, many times. Even as delegates scrambled for the exits, there was a tremendous explosion from somewhere below the council chamber. The floor buckled, throwing people off their feet. Smoke began to pour through the ventilation system. Then the auxiliary door, the one meant for emergencies and maintenance, blew inward. The blast was precise, controlled, meant to breach but not destroy. Through the smoke came 4 figures, each heavily armed and armored. The lead raider was massive, even bigger than. Half his body was mechanical, replaced with military-grade cybernetics. His arms ended not in hands but in weapon systems, compact cannons that were already whirring to life. Behind him came 3 more raiders, each carrying weapons that could drop a warrior in one shot. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates ran for the exits, but security doors were still closing, trapping most of them inside. Roared orders to his warriors, but they were unarmed per council rules. Several attempted to fight back with their natural strength, but pulse fire drove them back. The lead raider's sensors swept the room, analyzing, identifying targets. His mechanical eyes locked onto Sarah. "Human ambassador," he said, his voice distorted by his cybernetic vocal cords. "Perfect. Your government will pay well for your return." His weapons began to track toward her. Sarah didn't move from her seat. Her hand was still on Badger's head, fingers resting in his thick fur. The animal had tensed at the first explosion, his muscles coiling, but he hadn't moved yet. He was waiting. Around them, the raiders were advancing. One grabbed a fleeing delegate. Another fired a warning shot over the heads of the warriors, forcing them back. The lead raider took another step toward Sarah, his weapons charging with a high-pitched whine. "Come quietly, human, and no one else needs to die," he said. Sarah looked at him. Then she looked down at Badger. The animal's dark eyes were fixed on the raiders now, unblinking, calculating. She could feel the tension in him, the readiness. She knew what he was capable of. She had seen it before, though never in a situation quite like this. "Badger," she said softly, her hand lifted from his head. "Get them." For a moment, nothing happened. The chamber seemed frozen, waiting. Even the raiders paused, confused by this woman who sat calmly giving commands to a small animal. Then Badger moved. He didn't run. He exploded. One moment he was sitting at Sarah's feet. The next he was a blur of fur and fury, launching himself directly at the lead raider's legs. The raider had armor, military grade, designed to stop small arms fire and resist energy weapons. It didn't matter. Badger's jaws clamped down on the cyborg's leg with tremendous force, right at the joint where metal met synthetic flesh. The armor cracked, then it buckled, then it shattered. The raider screamed and fired his weapons wildly, pulse blasts tearing through the ceiling, missing Badger completely. The animal was already climbing, using the raider's own body as a ladder, claws finding purchase in armor seams, teeth tearing through cables and hydraulic lines. The second raider spun, trying to get a clear shot, but Badger was too fast, too close to his partner. The third raider fired anyway. The shot hit the lead raider in the shoulder, spinning him around. Badger rode the motion, never losing his grip, never stopping his assault. In less than 5 seconds, the lead raider was on the ground, sparking and twitching, his cybernetic systems failing as Badger's teeth found the control nexus at the base of his skull. The small animal leaped away, landing lightly, already moving toward the next target. The second raider managed to swing his weapon around, tracking Badger's movement. He fired. The pulse blast hit the floor where Badger had been a fraction of a second before. The animal rolled, came up under the raider's guard, and leaped. This raider wasn't cybernetic. He was an insect species with a hard exoskeleton and multiple limbs. That didn't help him. Badger went for the joints, the soft spots, the vulnerable areas that every species had. His claws raked across compound eyes. His teeth found the gap in the exoskeleton at the throat. The raider went down gurgling, trying to pull the animal off. Badger held on, squirming and twisting to avoid the raider's grasping hands, never releasing his grip. The third raider backed toward the blown door, his weapon pointed at Badger but his finger frozen on the trigger. He was watching his partners get torn apart by something that barely came up to his knee. The fourth raider was already running. Who had been frozen in shock like everyone else, suddenly found his voice. What in the seven hells is that creature? Sarah stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Badger. The animal had released the second raider, who was crawling away, leaving a trail of ichor behind him. Badger sat down in the middle of the chamber, licking his claws clean, looking for all the world like he had just finished a mildly interesting task. That, Sarah said calmly, is a honey badger, native to Earth. She walked over to Badger and pulled a small treat from her pocket. Good boy, heel. Badger trotted to her side, accepted the treat, and sat down again. His breathing was barely elevated. The violence that had just poured out of him seemed to have vanished completely, leaving behind the same calm animal that had walked into the chamber. The third raider chose that moment to bolt, dropping his weapon and running through the breached door. Station security was finally arriving, armored and ready, but there was little left for them to do. 2 raiders were down and unconscious. 2 had fled. And in the middle of it all stood a human and a small, stocky animal that had just proven everyone's assumptions catastrophically wrong. Part 2. The silence in the council chamber was absolute. Even the alarms had stopped, replaced by the quiet hum of emergency systems working to clear the smoke and assess damage. Station security moved in, carefully approaching the downed raiders, weapons trained on them despite the obvious fact that they were no longer a threat. Commander stood completely still, his crest flat against his skull. In his species, this was a sign of shock or deep respect, and right now it was definitely both. His eyes moved from the disabled raiders to Badger, then back again, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had witnessed. The delegate who had questioned Sarah earlier stepped forward cautiously. Her name was, and she had served in her planet's military for 30 years before becoming a diplomat. She had seen combat across a dozen worlds, but she had never seen anything quite like what that small Earth creature had just done. "Ambassador," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I believe I speak for everyone here when I say we have drastically misunderstood your companion." Sarah was checking Badger over, running her hands through his fur, looking for injuries. She found a slight burn on his shoulder where a pulse blast had grazed him, but he didn't even flinch when she touched it. Honey badgers had incredibly thick skin and a high pain tolerance. A minor burn barely registered. "You're not the first to make that mistake," Sarah said, "and you probably won't be the last. People see something small and assume it's helpless. That's a dangerous assumption to make about Earth's animals." Finally moved, his massive frame approaching slowly as if he were the one who needed to be cautious now. He stared down at Badger with an expression that was hard to read on his alien features. "This creature weighs, what, 20 of your pounds? Perhaps 30. "About 25, Sarah confirmed. "It just defeated 2 trained raiders in under a minute. One of them was a full combat cyborg." His voice held something that might have been awe. "How is this possible?" Sarah scratched behind Badger's ears, and the animal leaned into her touch, making that same soft sound of contentment. "Honey badgers are one of Earth's most fearless predators. They have extremely thick skin that resists bites and stings. Their jaws can bite through bone. They can shrug off venom that would kill most creatures 10 times their size. They've been documented fighting off lions, hyenas, and other predators much larger than themselves. "But why?" asked a delegate from the rear of the chamber. "What evolutionary pressure would create such a creature?" "Competition," Sarah said simply. "Earth is crowded. Every ecological niche is occupied, and usually by something dangerous. Honey badgers survived by being too tough to kill and too aggressive to mess with. They don't back down, ever. If you threaten them or something they care about, they fight, regardless of size, regardless of odds." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of the various delegates. "You all assumed Badger was a pet, that I keep him because he's cute or because humans are sentimental. That's not entirely wrong. We are sentimental, but you missed the important part. I don't keep Badger. He chooses to stay with me. There's a difference." "What difference?" asked. "Control versus loyalty," Sarah explained. "I can't make Badger do anything. If I tried to force him, he'd leave or worse. But I treat him well. I feed him, care for him, respect him. In return, he trusts me. And because he trusts me when I'm in danger, he responds with everything he has." A security officer approached, a warrior named Al who Sarah had met briefly before the summit. "Ambassador, we need to secure the chamber and get you to a safe location. The raiders' ships have been driven off, but there could be more boarding parties." Sarah nodded and stood up. Badger immediately rose as well, positioning himself between her and the security officer out of pure instinct. "It's okay, Badger," she said softly. "He's friendly." The animal relaxed slightly, but kept his attention on the officer. Al stared at Badger with an expression that clearly said he would very much like to not be between the ambassador and her guardian. "If it's acceptable, Ambassador, perhaps your companion could walk ahead of us instead." Despite the tension, Sarah smiled. "That's probably wise." They made their way out of the damaged council chamber, with Badger trotting ahead, still alert, still watching for threats. The delegates followed in a loose group, whispering among themselves, casting frequent glances at the small animal that had so thoroughly shattered their understanding of Earth's fauna. In a secure conference room 3 levels down, they regrouped. The station's commander, a four-armed species called the Rill, brought them up to date on the situation. The Scourge raiders had fled after their boarding parties failed to report back. Station defenses had inflicted significant damage on 2 of their ships. It was unlikely they would return. "We have prisoners from the council chamber," the commander reported. "Both are injured but stable. They'll face charges in council courts." "Good," said. Then he turned to Sarah. "Ambassador, I owe you an apology, multiple apologies. I mocked your companion. I questioned humanity's strength based on what I saw as weakness. I was wrong." Sarah inclined her head. "Apology accepted, Commander, but I want to make something clear. I didn't bring Badger here to prove a point or to show off. I brought him because he's my partner. Where I go, he goes. That's how we work on Earth with our companion animals." "Companion animals," repeated slowly. "Not pets, not servants, companions." "Exactly," Sarah said. "Humanity learned a long time ago that we didn't have to conquer everything on our planet. Sometimes it was better to cooperate. Dogs were wolves that figured out humans were better to work with than compete against. Horses let us ride them because we protected them and gave them food. Cats control pests for us. Bees pollinate our crops. We formed partnerships across species." She gestured to Badger, who was now lying down near her chair, though his eyes were still scanning the room. "Honey badgers are harder to work with than dogs or horses. They're not domesticated. They're not really tame. But if you earn their trust, if you treat them with respect, they'll stay with you. And if something threatens you, well, you saw what happens." A delegate, not the one from earlier but another member of their species, spoke up in clicking, translated tones. "Ambassador, my species has faced the Scourge many times. Their raiders are trained from youth, enhanced with cybernetics and weapons. A single raider can typically handle 5 or 6 of our warriors. Your Badger disabled 2 in under a minute." "Closer to 30 seconds. corrected another delegate who had apparently been timing it. 30 seconds, they agreed. And he weighs, what, 1/10 of what each raider weighed. How do we calculate the combat effectiveness of such a disparity? You don't, Sarah said, because you're still thinking about it wrong. Badger isn't a weapon. He's not a tool or a resource. He's a living being who chose to defend me because we have a relationship built on mutual trust and care. That's not something you can calculate or measure in standard combat metrics. Had been quiet, clearly thinking. Now he spoke again. We pride ourselves on our warrior culture. We raise our young through combat trials, harsh conditions, constant testing. We believe this creates the strongest fighters. He paused. But I watched you with your companion, Ambassador. You were gentle with him. You gave him treats. You touched him with obvious affection. Yet when danger came, he fought with a ferocity I have rarely seen. How do you explain this? Sarah considered the question carefully. It was an important one, and she wanted to get the answer right. Commander, Badger doesn't fight because I'm harsh with him or because he's afraid of me. He fights because he chooses to, because I'm worth protecting in his eyes. That choice, that loyalty, it's more powerful than any training or conditioning. She leaned forward. Think about it this way. Your warriors fight because they're trained to, because it's expected, because your culture demands it. They're very effective, I'm sure. But would they fight if they had a choice? Would they put themselves in danger if they could walk away? A true warrior does not flee, said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I'm not talking about honor or duty, Sarah said. I'm talking about motivation. Badger had a choice today. When those raiders came through that door, he could have run. He could have hidden. Nothing was forcing him to fight, but he did fight because he wanted to protect me. That kind of motivation, the kind that comes from genuine care and loyalty, it's incredibly powerful. The room was silent as the various delegates absorbed this. It was a different way of thinking about strength and combat effectiveness, one that many of them had never considered. Spoke up. Ambassador, earlier you said that assuming Badger was helpless was a dangerous mistake about Earth's animals. Plural. Are there others like him? Sarah smiled, but it wasn't entirely a happy expression. Commander, Badger is actually relatively small by Earth standards. We have predators that make him look tiny, crocodiles that can bite through steel, great white sharks that rule the oceans, polar bears that can weigh over 1,000 pounds and break through ice, Cape buffalo that charge in herds, and that's just the obvious ones. She pulled up her data pad and projected an image on the conference room screen. It showed a hippopotamus, massive and gray, its mouth open to display enormous teeth. This is a hippo, she said. It looks slow and peaceful, right? It kills more people in Africa than any other large animal. They're territorial, aggressive, and fast despite their size. She changed the image. Now it showed a tiny, colorful octopus. This is a blue-ringed octopus. It's small enough to fit in your palm. Its venom can kill an adult human in minutes, and there's no antidote. It's one of the most venomous creatures on Earth. Another image, a jellyfish, translucent and delicate-looking. Box jellyfish, another venomous species. Its sting causes excruciating pain and can stop your heart. She scrolled through more images. Spiders, snakes, insects, fish, mammals, reptiles. Each one came with a brief description of why it was dangerous. Earth, Sarah said quietly, is what we call a death world. Our planet is actively trying to kill us most of the time. Extreme weather, natural disasters, and thousands of species that can end a human life in seconds. We didn't have claws or thick skin or venom. We weren't the fastest or the strongest. We survived by being smart, adaptable, and by learning to work with the dangerous creatures around us instead of just fighting them all the time. Stared at the images cycling on the screen. And humans evolved alongside all of these creatures. Not just alongside, Sarah said. We competed with them, shared territory with them, learned from them, and eventually with many species we formed partnerships. Dogs help us hunt and guard our homes. Horses carry us across distances. Falcons hunt for us. Even elephants, massive creatures that could kill us easily, some human cultures work with them. But the honey badger said, "You said they're not domesticated. How did that partnership form?" Sarah reached down and ran her hand along Badger's back. The animal had finally relaxed somewhat, though he was still alert. Badger and I met in a rehabilitation center. He'd been injured by poachers, and I was there doing research on Earth predators. I helped nurse him back to health. When he was ready to be released, I opened his enclosure. She smiled at the memory. He walked out, looked around, then walked back in and went to sleep. He's been with me ever since. "He chose you," said, understanding dawning. "He chose me," Sarah confirmed. "And I choose him every day too. I could leave him at a habitat on Earth. He'd probably be fine. But I bring him with me because he's my partner, my friend. We chose each other." The conference room door opened, and a young officer stepped in. "Excuse me, but the council is ready to reconvene. They're asking all delegates to return to the main chamber. Repairs have been completed to make it safe." Everyone stood up, preparing to return. As they filed out, fell into step beside Sarah and Badger. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Before today, I was going to formally object to humanity's admission to the Defense Pact. I had the votes, or enough of them. I was going to argue that your species was too soft, too sentimental, not warrior enough for what's coming." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She had suspected as much. "I'm going to do the opposite now," continued. "I'm going to sponsor your admission myself, because I realized something today. We've been measuring strength all wrong. We thought it was about size, about weapons, about how harsh we could make our training. But you and Badger showed me differently. Real strength comes from bonds, from loyalty, from choosing to protect something because it matters to you, not because you're forced to." He looked down at the small animal walking between them. "Any species that can form partnerships with creatures like that, that can earn their loyalty and trust, that species is one I want on our side." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of accomplishment and pride. "Thank you, Commander. That means a lot." They reached the council chamber, which had been cleaned and repaired with remarkable speed. The damaged door had been replaced, the debris cleared away. New security measures were obviously in place, with armed guards stationed at every entrance. As the delegates took their seats, Sarah noticed that the mood had shifted dramatically from the beginning of the summit. Where before there had been doubt and skepticism, now there was respect and curiosity. Delegates who had laughed at Badger now gave him a wide berth and watched him with wary admiration. The vote on humanity's admission to the Defense Pact was called to order, and as Sarah expected, the result was very different from what it would have been a few hours earlier. Part 3. The vote was unanimous. Sarah sat in the council chamber, watching as delegate after delegate stood to voice their support for humanity's admission to the Galactic Defense Pact. Even the, who had been neutral at best, now spoke in favor of Earth joining the alliance. The reasoning they gave varied, but the underlying message was the same. Humans had proven they understood something fundamental about strength and survival that many species had overlooked. When the formal vote concluded, there was a moment of silence, then polite applause. It wasn't celebratory so much as acknowledging a significant moment. Humanity had just joined something bigger than itself, an alliance that spanned hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. Badger, lying at Sarah's feet throughout the proceedings, yawned widely and put his head down on his paws. The galaxy's political structure had just shifted, and he could not have cared less. Sarah found that deeply amusing. After the official ceremony concluded, there was a reception in one of the station's larger gathering spaces. Delegates mingled, discussing the implications of humanity's admission and what it meant for the future of the pact. Sarah found herself surrounded almost immediately by representatives from various species, all wanting to talk about Earth, human culture, and especially about the planet's fauna. "Is it true that humans keep large predators in their homes?" asked a small, furry delegate from a species Sarah didn't immediately recognize. We heard rumors that some humans live with creatures called cats that could hunt and kill them but choose not to. Sarah smiled. House cats aren't quite that dangerous, but yes, they're descended from predators. Most are small, about this big. She held her hands apart to indicate a cat-sized space. But we do have people who work with much larger predators. There are sanctuaries where humans care for lions, tigers, bears, all kinds of animals that could absolutely kill a person. But why, the delegate asked, genuinely puzzled. Why risk this? Because they need help, Sarah said simply. Many of these animals are endangered, their habitats destroyed by human expansion. We created the problem, so some of us try to fix it by protecting them, studying them, helping their populations recover. And in the process, we learn about them. Sometimes we even form bonds with individual animals. Join the conversation, towering over the smaller delegates. I've been researching Earth's history since the attack, he said. I found records of human soldiers who work with dogs in combat situations. These dogs, they detect explosives, track enemies, even attack when commanded. Is this common? Very common, Sarah confirmed. Military working dogs have been part of human warfare for thousands of years. They have senses we lack, abilities we can't replicate even with technology. A trained dog can smell explosives or drugs that our scanners might miss. They can track a person across miles by scent alone. And yes, they can fight when necessary. And these dogs, they're treated well, asked, given the respect they've earned. The good ones are, Sarah said. Military working dogs are often given ranks, honored when they retire, buried with full military ceremonies when they die. We don't always get it right. Humans are flawed, but we try to honor the partnerships we form with other species. A diplomat named approached, carrying a data pad. Ambassador, I've been reading about Earth's domestication history. It says humans domesticated dogs over 30,000 years ago, horses about 6,000 years ago, cats somewhere in between. That's an incredibly long time to spend forming these partnerships. It is, Sarah agreed, and it changed us as much as it changed them. There are studies that show humans evolved alongside dogs. We learned to read each other's expressions, to communicate across the species barrier. Some scientists think we might not have become the dominant species on Earth without those partnerships. Joined them holding a drink that glowed faintly blue. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, Ambassador, about motivation and choice. In my military service, we used fear and discipline to create soldiers. It was effective, but the cost was high. High dropout rates, mental health issues, loyalty problems. Are you suggesting humans found a better way? Sarah considered her answer carefully. Not exactly better, just different. Humans use discipline and training too. But we learned a long time ago that soldiers who fight because they believe in something fight harder than soldiers who fight because they're afraid not to. And the same principle applies to our relationships with animals. An animal that chooses to be with you, that trusts you, is more valuable than one you forced into submission. She looked down at Badger, who had followed her to the reception and was now sitting beside her, watching the crowd with his usual alertness. Badger could leave me any time he wants. I don't have him locked up. I don't control him with fear. He stays because he wants to. And because of that, when danger comes, he fights with everything he has. Not just for you, observed. I noticed during the attack. The raiders were threatening the entire chamber. Badger could have focused solely on protecting you, but he went after them aggressively. He was protecting everyone. Sarah nodded, pleased that someone had noticed. That's another thing about these partnerships. They create a sense of community, of group. Badger sees the people around me as part of his group now. He's protective by nature, and that protectiveness extends beyond just me. Fascinating, said, making notes on his data pad. Ambassador, would humanity be willing to share information about these domestication programs? The techniques you use, the psychology behind them. I think many species in the pact could benefit from understanding your approach." "Of course," Sarah said. "Though I should warn you, it's not a quick process. The partnerships humans have with animals took thousands of years to develop. You can't rush that kind of bond." "But you personally formed a bond with Badger in what, a few years?" pointed out. "True," Sarah admitted. "But I had thousands of years of human experience to draw on. My species has been forming these kinds of bonds for so long that we have instincts for it now. We know how to read animal body language, how to build trust, how to respect boundaries while still forming connections. That knowledge doesn't exist in most other species because you never needed it." "And you think we should develop it now?" asked. "I think it couldn't hurt," Sarah said. "The galaxy is dangerous. The Scourge Raiders proved that today. Having allies, even unusual ones, is valuable. And it doesn't have to be animals like Badger. Every species could find their own approach based on their world's ecology and their own nature." The conversation continued for another hour, with more delegates joining and asking questions. Sarah found herself becoming an impromptu ambassador not just for humanity, but for Earth's entire ecosystem. She pulled up images and videos on her data pad, showing the incredible diversity of life on her home planet. The delegates were fascinated and more than a little intimidated. Eventually, the reception wound down. Delegates began returning to their ships or quarters, and Sarah found a quiet corner to rest. She was exhausted, both from the attack and from hours of diplomatic discussion. Badger seemed to sense her fatigue and pressed against her leg, a comforting weight. Found her there, sitting alone with her companion. The massive commander approached slowly, making sure she saw him coming. Old military instincts die hard, and after what he'd seen Badger do, he wasn't about to surprise them. "Ambassador," he said, settling his bulk onto a bench clearly designed for someone his size. "I wanted to speak with you privately before you left the station." "Of course, Commander," Sarah said. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about my species," he said slowly. "About how we raise our young, how we train our warriors. We're proud of our methods, proud of our strength. But watching you and Badger today, I started wondering if we've been doing it wrong." Sarah waited, letting him work through his thoughts. "We break our young through harsh training," continued. "We believe that only through suffering can true warriors be forged. And it works. Our soldiers are fierce, capable. But they're also angry, resentful sometimes. And when given the choice, many leave military service as soon as their contracts allow. We lose soldiers constantly to other professions because they don't want to fight anymore." "That sounds hard," Sarah said quietly. "It is," admitted. "We tell ourselves it's necessary, that this is just how things are. But today I saw something different. I saw a tiny creature fight with more ferocity than I've seen from warriors twice my size, and he did it because he chose to. Because he cared about protecting you. Not because he was forced, not because he feared punishment. Just because he wanted to." He looked at Sarah with an expression she was learning to read as sadness. "What if we're wrong, Ambassador?